why is it that salespeople, say the same auto dealership or selling the same technology, why can one make $50,000 a year and the other $500,000 a year using the exact same techniques, the exact same process? What is it? What's the difference? So I began studying it. I wanted to understand it, but it was at that point that I realized that for years I had been teaching salespeople what to say, how to say it, even why to say it. But I was missing something critical, and that is who they need to be.
Hey y'all, welcome to Selling with Social, the podcast that helps marketers increase marketing qualified leads, sales reps to shatter sales results, and sales leaders to grow as leaders. Each show, we interview sales, marketing, and social media practitioners, leaders, and influencers to help you connect, close more deals, build stronger relationships with clients, and improve your sales productivity. I'm Mario Martinez Jr. You're now listening to Selling with Social. Shari Levitin, I am so excited that you're joining me on Selling with Social today. Thank you so much, my friend, for being on today's podcast.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
Well, I've heard so many great things about you from so many folks in our industry. I've actually have right in my hand your new book, Heart and Sell, 10 Universal Truths Every Salesperson Needs to Know. Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for the copy. And by the way, your personal signature and endorsement here on the book, to dear Mario. So I appreciate that. And been following you for a while. Jill Conrath actually connected the two of us, and I'm so glad she did. So thank you very much for this book and game-changing thoughts that are really coming out of this. And I really want to spend some time talking about some of these thoughts and humanizing the connection experience and the art of new age selling, which you talk about as well in the book to help our audience. But before I go into that, my friend, please do us a favor. Tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us who Shari is.
Well, first of all, I want to know, did Jill Conrath tell you that last weekend in San Francisco, I ran over her foot?
Oh my God, no. And if you were here in San Francisco, what I want to know is why did the two of you call me so that we could No, but tell me what happened.
We just produced a blog about it. It was pretty funny. Well, we were going to an event together for the Wildlife Conservation Network. We're both really into the environment. And so we met at the San Francisco airport, Ubered. We have a home in South San Francisco. And the car was sitting in the garage. And I needed to jumpstart it because it had been there for a while. And Jill was in front of the car. And I turned the ignition and the car jumped forward. Of course, I wanted to blame the car instead of the driver. Oh. But I literally ran over her foot. So we created a blog called What to Do When You Get Off on the Wrong Foot. So
I love it. We're going to link to that inside the show notes here. Yeah. Was she okay?
Yeah, good question. She was okay. And fortunately, it would have been the end of a friendship if she wasn't. But she was fine. And then we spent the next, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes just making jokes, the worst jokes you could think of, like missteps and maybe you're lactose intolerant. Let's call a tow truck. We had some fun with it.
Oh, man. Well, what I want to know is why didn't you call me so I could have had my foot run over too?
You know what? I will promise you a foot run over, not a foot rub, not to be confused with a foot rub, but a foot run over. Next time I'm in town, I promise to run over your foot. All
right. Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about you, my friend.
Gosh, let's see. I don't know how far back you want me to go, but
what do you want our listeners to know?
Well, I think it's always important how someone got in sales. I always say very few of us probably thought, I want to be a salesman when I grow up, right? When I grew up, you were sort of a doctor, a lawyer, or a trash man, right?
Yeah.
And I went to school at the University of Colorado at Boulder. I joke that I had a double major, partying and skiing.
Okay, like most.
Well, particularly at the University of Colorado, right? And I was actually on my way to law school, and I answered an ad in the paper, and I'm not kidding you. It said, Foxy Ladies, summer resort job, earn $400 to $600 a week, no experience necessary. I figured I qualified at least because I had no experience necessary.
Right.
And it was a sales job. And again, I never knew there was such a thing as a sales job, that it was real. And you've probably heard this story before. Problem is, I made a good amount of money, enough that I decided not to go back to law school. And it was a sales job for vacation ownership, timeshare.
Timeshare,
and, of course, this was before I knew that it might have a bad reputation as being high pressure or anything like that. So I ended up getting out of the industry when I found it to be, really not my style. But I got back in 10 years later, after many trials and tribulations, got on with Marriott, who is a terrific company. And that's where I met the man who would be my mentor. And my life changed. And I found that there was a system and a process for selling. I became the top salesperson in all of Marriott. And I couldn't figure out why people were high pressuring people into buying on that day. And I think I was one of the first ones that said, no, you can build a relationship. You can get back to people. And that's when I started creating a system that became the basis of the training that I do today. So, became a manager, became a leader, started Levitin Group in 1997 with the goal of bringing heart and ethics into the sales profession. And since then, we're in over 40 countries on 5 continents. Gosh, we started with audio tapes, went to videotapes. Now we have virtual learning, and we're in many different verticals. But that's my history. I think very often when you start at a young age, you find that if you have the right mentor and the right company, it's the greatest profession in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that story. First off, I'm a Marriott owner out of St. Kitts. I actually, there's an interesting story. I haven't taken it to social media yet, but the truth be told, I actually paid off my Marriott timeshare, which I love Marriott. It's a phenomenal property. Anywhere you go, it's absolutely amazing. But there's one problem. I was previously married. I got divorced. The former timeshare is in the name of mine and my ex-wife's, and it's been 10 years since I've been divorced, and Marriott cannot change it because the St. Kitts government will not process the actual transfer of papers, and it takes them, quote unquote, 2 years, and we're now going on 10. So anyways, nonetheless, my wife today, every time we go to Marriott, she has actually called my ex-wife's name. Which gives some great discussion and some good laughs, because I am not known as but interestingly enough, I am not known as Mario Martinez when I travel to my wife's timeshare, which she has one. I'm known as Kenneth Martinez, which is actually the name of her ex-husband. And the same thing happened on her side as well. They can't figure out how to change the name. So,
okay, there's a novel in here somewhere. Right?
There really is. But any case, interesting when you talk about the timeshare sales and now moving into corporate sales, and a lot of the similarities that we see in this concept of selling and the world of selling that has taken place, the high pressure, buy now, what are you going to make something happen now, do the deal, right? And how salespeople are oftentimes trained, not just in timeshare sales, but even in corporate B2B segments, right?
Oh, yeah.
So this is going to be an interesting discussion. As you know, we have marketers, sales enablement folks, and sales leaders that are listening in. And I want to get down into some of the questions really I have for you about selling and the art of selling. And let me first start with the book. I want to understand, what was the inspiration behind Heart and Sell? And I know that obviously you've been in the industry for a long time. You've seen some certain things, but it takes a lot of work to write a book. And I know because I haven't finished it and I'm trying to finish it. So tell me the inspiration, my dear.
Well, Mario, I'm going to tell you 2 things, and one of them is very personal, and I've never divulged it. But you're so likable. I feel like divulging it today.
I feel like giving you a hug now. I don't even know what it is, but I want to hug you. There you go.
Virtual hug. You are the most likable guy ever, by the way. I was teasing you earlier about if I could only have teeth as white as yours. Anyway.
Someone asked me about that. By the way, my teeth have never been whitened, nor have I had braces. So it's all natural as I'm smiling.
I know, but you don't drink coffee. So,
I do not. No, that's
all
right.
Natural.
Do you think I need coffee, Shari?
No.
No more caffeine for me. I'm sorry. I totally knocked you off there.
No, that's okay. But later I want you to tell us if you have any bad habits at all.
Uh-oh.
But we'll save that for the end. It goes back to, it was a few years ago, and I was doing a big training seminar. There was probably 1,000 people in the audience. And at one of the breaks, a gentleman comes running up to me from behind, and he's just sort of sweaty, and he's an older guy. And he says, Shari, I've been listening to all your DVDs. I have all your videos. I even have your old cassette tapes. And I'm thinking I'm due for a big compliment, right? He's rushing up to me. Not the case. He says, but I got to tell you, your training doesn't work. And I thought, well, okay, first of all, why are you telling me this?
Right.
And then why are you here if it doesn't work? But, of course I was curious, and I started talking to him. Well, it turns out, Mario, he knew my training system inside out. He could recite some of my jokes better than I could. He could recite the stories. He knew, all of the, the 5 whys, the 6 real objections, all of the concepts and techniques I'd been teaching for years. But then I did a role play. And as we started interacting, there was just a total lack of authenticity. It was like he was going through the motions, but I didn't feel like he cared about me. I didn't feel like I got him, like I knew who he was. There was no empathy, no genuine curiosity. And that was the first point that I thought, wow, what is it? And I've tried to figure out for years, Mario, why is it that salespeople say the same auto dealership or selling the same technology? Why can one make $50,000 a year and the other $500,000 a year using the exact same techniques? Yeah. The exact same process. What is it? What's the difference? So I began studying it. I wanted to understand it. But it was at that point that I realized that for years I had been teaching salespeople what to say, how to say it, even why to say it. But I was missing something critical, and that is who they need to be. And that's when I realized that what you do matters, but who you are, particularly today, who you are matters more. There's 10 universal truths. 5 of them are what you need to do. They're the sales technique, the basics, as they call them, that we all need to have. But the other 5 are much more important today. That's the who you need to be. It's the skills like resilience, emotional intelligence, optimism, integrity, authenticity, and how do we develop that so it becomes part of who we are? And how do we connect with ourselves? The part that I didn't share and that I haven't shared with anybody is during this process or shortly after I met this gentleman, I became a mother to my husband's son. He lost his mother. So I became an instant step parent to a grieving little boy. So as soon as I became a parent, the therapists were saying, well, you've got to build trust. And I thought, well, I know how to do that. I know the 5 rules of building trust. Right? This is what I teach. I can do this. They said, and you've got to build, a strong connection. Well, I know that. That's the 3 rules of, and I'm thinking of all my training manuals. I had never had children.
Right.
And I realized pretty quickly, you don't do empathy. You don't do trust. It's who you are.
Yeah.
And that was truthfully my biggest realization and why I knew I needed to write a book, because those same skills of connecting with a child or connecting with a loved one are the same skills a salesperson needs to have in order to truly have that authentic connection with a client. And clients have to have it today. Has to be there.
Interesting that you mentioned that. As you know, we teach digital sales training, and it is all about creating conversations online to move them to offline. And where we stop at here with our organization is the moment that you pick up the phone and say hello. But it's interesting because I actually have developed a module that is all about humanizing the connection experience and how important authenticity is and being yourself. For example, anytime I connect with somebody, I reach out to them and say, hey, thanks so much for connecting with me. And I tell them my story. This is my 20th year in business sales. And I spent 18 of those 20 years in corporate sales and a year as an entrepreneur opening and launching my own digital sales training company. So naturally, people want to like why, how, when, those are the types of questions that I oftentimes get. But I always open up with the story of how my company began, so people get to know me. And this is a story, I think you may remember reading it. It's Dad, you said LinkedIn would make you money. It was a conversation with my 5-year-old about how we started the company. And about 95% 5% of the time, people are like, that was an amazing story. And the other 5% of the time, people are like, what do I care about that? Like, what does that do for me? And you know what it instantly tells me is that is not my targeted buyer. Because you and I probably won't get along, just the way my personality and the way who I am and about how I warm up and become very authentic and caring and empathetic to the sales process, and more importantly, to your success. And so I think that's just like that's a beautiful illustration you gave. I'm so sorry that your stepson lost his mom. That is a horrible thing to take place. But for you to actually learn this component of empathy and how to be empathetic, and that it's really yourself to be more successful, that's phenomenal. Like, this is a great sales quality that I think many people definitely lack.
Or they have it. I mean, I believe, Mario, we all have a story, right? We all have a story to tell. And if we take the time to listen and to open our hearts, everybody has a story. And I think sometimes, particularly salespeople and entrepreneurs, think it's too vulnerable. They don't want to open up. They don't want to, it's sort of this fake it till you make it, toughness. And the truth is, when we're vulnerable and when we're authentic, we realize we're all the same, right? You and I have the same struggles, the same insecurities. Here we are, we're speaking, and our listeners might think, well, if I were in their position, and we don't always talk about our insecurities, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Our foibles. But once we really open up, we're more alike than we are similar.
Yeah. Well, interesting. You mentioned that vulnerability. Inside of our training module, we talk about vulnerability creates believability. Mm-hmm. Believability creates trust. Trust creates relationships. Relationships create sales, right? Those are the those five steps. Right. Maybe I should have that as part of my book now that I think about it.
I think you're writing your book right now, Mario.
I am. I
you're writing your book.
So those of you who are listening, that's mine. But that's actually,
I'll interview you. I'll plug your book.
I love it. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, I mean, so you hit the nail on the head, and yeah, I retract what I said that many people lack it. I just think that in the world that we live in, with sales leaders and managers driving to a productivity-based methodology as opposed to a quality-based methodology, that we're challenged with trying to incorporate that authentic, empathetic self into the sales process, especially at the beginning of the sales process, when you've got an SDR or BDR that is just churning and burning, right?
And the higher up you go in an organization, I mean, we all know this, right? The less the executive wants to talk about your product,
sure.
Right?
Yeah. I
mean, products are ubiquitous. Very few people have a product that's so different and so unbelievable, right? So what's the difference? The difference is us.
Yeah.
I have a piece in my book where I talk about you've got to be a helping brand. What does that mean? And very similar to your feelings on trust, one of the things I talk about in my book, have you heard of a company called Primary Intelligence?
No.
They're out of Salt Lake. They're terrific. Ken Allred's the CEO, so I'm giving Ken a little plug here. They're a win-loss company.
Okay.
And I love what they do, because what they do is after a sale is lost, they interview the clients and they find out, exactly why they didn't purchase. But then they interview the salespeople, the exact same salespeople, and ask them the same question. It shouldn't be surprising. The answers couldn't be more different. Yeah,
right? Yeah.
The salespeople always say, well, they didn't buy because it was price, something outside their control. It wasn't the product they were looking for. But invariably, 90-something% of the time, the customer says, we didn't purchase because we prefer the status quo. And if you dig deeper into that, it's that products are so complex today. Right. And we can't stand the complexity. I mean, you talk about all this new software. I mean, I don't even understand how my microwave works, to tell you the truth.
I never thought about that either, but you're right.
But we use it. Right. And I had a mentor who once told me a customer doesn't need to understand a product in order to buy a product. They just need to know that you understand them.
Yeah.
So this trust becomes more and more important. And particularly as you're dealing in the C-suite. Your customers don't need to understand all the intricacies of your product yet. So many novice reps lead with, here's how my product works. I tell them that they're being factually correct, but emotionally incorrect.
Yeah.
We're giving them the all about how it works.
Yeah.
And instead of building a relationship where they say, I trust you, show me how we can integrate it into our current processes.
Yeah, great points. Now, switching gears, something in the book you talked about the acronym, which I loved, Sales Hell. What is that about? What does it mean? What's it for? What does it do? Talk about that for a second.
Okay, great. Yeah, and hopefully that acronym doesn't offend anybody, but it's just so perfect. Once I wrote out the universal truths, and by the way, it took me probably 3 or 4 years to write the book, Mario.
Oh, good. So I feel much better because I'm on year 1 now.
No, you've had 20 years experience, so you've got everything it takes, but it does take a long time to think about structure. And when I was writing the 10 universal truths, and there are truths like, emotions drive all decision making. There's freedom in structure. In sales, no never means no. Anything that can be told can be asked. So I was looking at these truths and I thought, gosh, a lot of my followers are sales veterans and sales leaders. And they're going to look at these universal truths and they're going to go, yeah, I knew that. So what's new? I mean, how many times do you have people that come to you and say, well, we already knew that. Tell us something we don't know, right? I already knew, for example, that I'm supposed to listen more than I talk. I already knew, that I'm supposed to really learn about my prospects before I engage, whatever the case may be. But the question is, are you doing it? I get that you know it, right, but are you doing it every single time? I'm a rock climber. I can know all about a crack in a rock, but all of a sudden I'm hanging from a 5'8" and I'm scared out of my wits.
Right? Exactly.
So what sales hell is it says, how come very often as humans, we know what to do, but we don't do it? And I did some research. Turns out there's a part of the brain, because everybody loves neuroscience today, there's a part of the brain called the default mode network. And it actually lights up when we're taking the path of least resistance. So what that means is we all have certain default tendencies. So you can know what to do. I can know that I'm supposed to stand up straight, but I slouch anyway. Okay. I can know that I'm not supposed to have that second glass of wine, but I have the third anyway. Okay. I can know all of these things. And so we all have certain default tendencies. And I divided it into 4. What makes us default into this subconscious sort of negative behavior that actually costs us sales? Because we have default modes in sales as well. And I broke it into 4 pieces. Habit. And I talk about habit can make us default. Ego's the biggest one and the hardest one. We very often don't ask for help, blame it, not my fault. Like when I ran over Jill's foot, it's the car fault. It's the car's fault.
Right.
And that prevents us from growing. Lack of knowledge. Some new reps that are listening right now, they simply don't have the knowledge.
Yeah.
Maybe they really don't know what to do, or they don't know the intricacies of what to do. And then the biggest one is laziness. We know what to do, but we just
don't do it.
Don't feel like it.
Yeah. So these elements of hell, sales hell, habit, ego, lack of knowledge, and laziness is what prevents people from doing what? Not doing what they know they should be doing. And I'll just give you a couple of examples that I see probably the most. We all know we're a lot on storytelling lately, right? We're all supposed to tell, stories, which I believe in. Storytelling is an art. I find a lot of sales reps, out of sheer habit, tell the same stories over and over again, and they go on and on and on and on, and they lose the attention span of the customer. That's habit. Okay, so they're going to default out of that habit. You might default out of ego where, start arguing with a customer. You're not really isolating an objection, and you can't control your own emotional state, and it's ego. You get defensive. So what I do in the book is I write down all of the default behaviors that a salesperson can have. And we do this in our live seminars, and it's a blast. And you can do it for marketing. You can do it for leadership. And you write down, and I recommend your listeners do this right now. Not right now, but later. Unless they're driving. Unless they're driving, then you should do it right now. But a great exercise is write down all of the default behaviors. In other words, all of the negative sales behaviors. I talk more than I listen. I don't isolate objections. I don't do my pre-work. All of the things that salespeople might default into. And if you go through them, you could put an H, an E, an L, or an L next to all of them without fail. Yeah. And it's pretty interesting because once you're aware of these default modes, that's sort of the first step to recovery, if you will. Yeah. Yeah. So either fix, amend, adjust, or get rid of the hell, and you'll be more successful, right? Get rid of the habits that are preventing you from actually doing the right things. Throw the ego outside the door in terms of you're the best, the brightest, the awesomest, whatever it might be. Develop your lack of knowledge so that you can actually become more skilled in the trade and or in product. Exactly. throw out the laziness because sales is hard work and it just doesn't happen. Coming back to this one on ego, as I was reading through some of the content of the book, this was interesting to me because what came to mind is we talk about the concept of ego, but what I have seen, and I'd love to get your viewpoint on this, what I have seen is that maybe the rep doesn't necessarily have the ego, but the company has the ego. We're the biggest, we're the best, we're the brightest, we're the largest, we're the fastest growing. And that perspective is passed off down to the sales organization, which there is some benefit to having that feeling and the biggest, the best, the brightest. But you focus in on that element as to why a customer should go with you when that they really may not care about that. And I think reps may be adopting, I've seen reps adopt this perspective of the company's ego, which really lends credibility. It's the difference between the credibility and the ego. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
So wise, Mario. You're absolutely right. And you're a parent. You have a son. I have a son now. And it's the same for a parenting environment. If we're constantly blaming because of ego, it's not my fault, you create a culture of blame. The problem with a culture of blame is, by definition, it prevents you from growing. Right? Yeah. And I know you talk in your literature about a growth mindset.
Yeah.
And I think more than any other virtue today, a growth mindset is one of the most important, because if you're not curious, if you're not continually growing and learning, you're going to get beat by the competition. It's bound to happen. One of the wisest things my mentor told me is, he said, there's 3 goals to any sales presentation. I share this with managers as well. Number 1, make the customer feel better about you and your organization when they leave than when they came in, or depending how you're engaging with them on the phone. Because if they're not satisfied today, they're going to tweet it out to 10,000, right? It's the stakes are higher. Number 2 goal is to make the sale. But number 3, if you didn't make the sale, find out the real reason why, learn from it, and grow. And companies that have ego, they stop growing. And that's the most dangerous thing a company can do. I remember I was working with a company on the East Coast, and I was meeting with their leadership. And seriously, for the first 3-4 hours, they're complaining about their salespeople and, how they're not getting good prospects. They're not setting them up correctly. They just don't understand this and that. We've been telling them over and over again. They just don't listen. And I mean, it's a complaint fest, right? It's an outright complaint fest. So I finally looked at him and I said, well, just out of curiosity, who's in charge of training these reps?
Right.
And there's this long silence. They said, well, that would be us. I said, well, so let me get this right. They're looking to you for inspiration and leadership, but you're complaining about them.
Right. Yeah.
And, and there were many things that were wrong. First and foremost, they had this whole culture of blame, and then the salespeople were blaming the management team. And the problem is, when you start doing that and not taking personal responsibility and personal accountability, you fail to grow. The best companies that I see out there, and what we work with leadership to do, is to build this whole culture of accountability. And it's actually a strength to admit your weaknesses.
Yeah.
It needs to be a strength to say, I'm not good at that. I need your help. Because you're right. Ego will paralyze an organization.
Yeah. And interesting, this particular topic, actually, if you get the ego in check, well, if you get all of these things related to hell that you mentioned, sales hell, right? The habit, the ego, the lack of knowledge, the laziness. If you get all these things in check, in theory, it allows you to become more that empathetic type of salesperson, which allows the vulnerability to take place, which then allows you to build trust, of which you spend, I think, 2 whole chapters talking about building trust in the book. Why do you think building trust is so much harder to do? And how do you build it and maintain it?
In this political climate, it should be pretty obvious that we're in what's called the post-truth era, right? Pseudo facts.
Nobody tells the truth.
Nobody tells the truth. And here's the thing. We were talking about just a year ago, 2 years ago, that the customer has, researched your company and your product. They know 83% about your company before they walk in. Well, now we have another problem. They've researched your company, but they don't even know whether it's true.
True or not. Yeah, that's a good point.
Right? So times are different. All indicators are showing us that trust is at an all-time low. It's never been lower. People don't know what to believe, who to believe. They can't even trust the news anymore, according to some people, depending on which camp you're in. But the idea is trust is at an all-time low. The second thing we're dealing with is overwhelm. So we've got low trust, high overwhelm. So products are more complicated than ever before. I heard an interesting statistic from a neuroscientist. He actually happens to be my brother, Levitin.
I mean, it's kind of you could trust him.
I could do a plug. I could certainly trust him. And he's written a couple of bestsellers. And he has some interesting statistics. And his name's Dan Levitin. He tells us that in the last couple of years, in the last 5 years, we have created more content in the last 5 years than in all humankind before.
Wow.
So you've got low trust and all this information on the internet, right?
Right.
And people don't know what to believe. So it goes right back to they have to know who to believe. Now, what is trust made of? And I love your distinctions on what trust is made of. And I think as long as we break apart trust, so you did a great job of breaking apart trust. I break it apart in the book and I say trust is made of 4 factors. So it's made of empathy, reliability, competency, and integrity. And again, it used to be when we were talking about, the old style selling that if I liked you, I'd buy from you, right? This whole relationship selling movement. And while empathy is key, and if we don't have empathy, if we don't listen, we're not going to get in the door. Empathy is what gets you in the door, but it's reliability, competency, and integrity that keep you there. And that takes a commitment to making sales a profession. And I'm even talking about the little things. Studies show with reliability, it's not the huge things, like I'm going to deliver the product on time, that your installation is going to be exactly when I say. I mean, if you say you're going to call back in 24 hours, you call back in 24 hours.
Right.
If you say that you're going to, send a book that you think your client might like, send it. And I think there is a massive condition of unreliability today. People don't do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
So those are the types of things that we really need to focus our training on. Competency, of course, it used to be enough to build rapport. Now we have to build respect. We have to know our product at least as well as our customers do. And of course, we're going to make promises and perhaps have to break them, but then we need to make new agreements with our customers.
Yeah.
So don't worry if you can't do something that you said you're going to do, call the customer back, face it, say, hey, I know I said such and such. I got to tell you, and say, I'm sorry. Again, don't blame.
Yeah.
So then these are the soft skills, the virtues, the who you need to be really matters today.
Yeah, I love, I want to touch on the competency and the integrity piece. So I agree, empathy gets you in the door, reliability, competency, and integrity keeps you in the door, in the room actually, right? But it reminds me of a story, and I think I've told this before on another podcast here, but I was working with a Fortune 10 client, and this was back when I was a global account director. And I remember that we were going through and they were doing a cost-cutting measure. And the company decided to take everything that we had and go and put it out to RFP for bid. Now, we knew that there was no way that they could take our services out to bid because in this particular circumstance, none of the other carriers would offer all of the customized services that we offered at the price point that we offered. So if they were looking to go lower cost, they really couldn't, they had to sacrifice something, right? Mm-hmm. And so what ended up happening is we actually lost, interestingly enough. We lost because they wanted to go with a lower price, but they were willing to sacrifice all of the level of service that we offered along with it. So the global CIO, direct report to the CEO of this $120 billion company, he and I had developed a very, very trusted partnership with each other. And I texted him and said, hey, I just got the word that we're actually losing the deal. You're making a really, really big mistake. Call me. So he called me about 4 hours later on my cell phone. We had a 20-minute conversation and he said, give me the skinny. Tell me what happened. Right? And told him what happened, focus on 2 things. I'm calling you because I know you're competent and I know you've brought our business to where it is. And I don't feel that my chief procurement officer is actually competent in making the decision that he's making. And number 2, I absolutely unequivocally trust you. We've been through war zones together.
Right.
And so it was the integrity part. And of course, I wasn't going to blow up the CPO, right? But the CPO made a decision that was purely based upon one thing, and that was price. And he was going to hurt the company, right? If you eliminate this component, you will affect 60,000 end users. And you, Mr. CIO, are going to take the hit for that because of your CPO's inability to be able to actually analyze the right amount of data. And then he actually called me and said, I trusted you, right? I trust you. In some cases, because I was so ingrained in the business,
Yes,
he trusted me more than the CPO himself. Turns out we won that deal back, and it was a $45 million contract. Right?
Wow.
After we were told we lost. But it was because of those two things, the competency and integrity. And I think if salespeople understand how to really drive that in the sales process and prove their competency to be a trusted advisor and to deal with integrity, that will help them in that process. And to your point, this is that concept on building the trust that you talk about in the book.
Well, and you had something else there, and, kudos to you. That is, we talked about at the very beginning, you also had the courage, right, to make the call. That takes courage. And I think particularly a lot of new reps, they're scared. I learned that the core word in courage comes from the word heart. So we have to think, a lot of times, it's hard to pick up the phone and make that call to the CEO. It's hard to pick up the phone and make the call to the decision maker. And I always say the call you're afraid to make, you must make. And so you have to have courage. And that just shows how big your heart is. Because if I care enough about my customer, and I care more about my customer than my own ego or my own fear of failure, I'm going to make that tough call. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, heck, what's the worst they can say? We really did feel like we did the right vetting and we made the right decision, right? So, I mean, the worst, that's the worst that can be said, especially if you're coming at it from a place, and what people know, it's not a place of trying to drive commissions. Although don't get me wrong, we were focusing on driving my revenue, right? But it's focusing on a place like that you truly care about your business, the customer's business operations.
That's right.
Love that discussion. The other one you talked about, you talked about, and I just want to switch gears here. I'm looking at my notes here. There's something that I really, really liked that you talked about, and that was celebrating the word no and how we can use the word no to actually grow. Talk to me about what you mean by that, or how you tease this out inside the book.
Well, I mean, think about the word no, right? We've heard the word no ever since we were children, right? No, you can't have that cookie. No, you can't go out. No, today. No, you can't have, any more iPad time, right? And so we have a natural aversion to the word no, but there's two pieces here that are critical. And number one, what deal was ever made without a no somewhere along the way? So salespeople really need to understand first how to try to overcome objections by asking the right questions before they even get the objections. But if and when they do get the objections, they really need to have a strategy for dealing with them. But deeper than that, I think, is this courage component when it comes to no, having the courage. And like I said before, I would ask our listeners after this, write down the 5 scariest things you could do. I mean, the things that petrify you, that are so far out of your comfort zone, you can't even imagine it. But if you were to have a good result, they would change your life. What are those things? And you know what?
Do it.
Because the difference, Mario, between you and someone who's struggling to start a business, the difference between somebody like you who's got a fantastic career and someone who isn't doing it is many things. But I would venture to guess one of the big things is you got out of your comfort zone. You went for it and you weren't scared of no. I also think that it's too easy with social media today and email to say, well, I called the CEO, I left a message, he didn't call back. I left a voicemail and they didn't call back. Okay, so in the book I talk about, but no never means no.
Yeah.
Be creative. I got one of the biggest deals of my life at that time when I was a new consultant. I kept trying to get a hold of a CEO named Simon. And I did all the usual. I emailed, I called, and he had expressed some interest at a conference, months ago. I had my assistant try to call his assistant. We did all that, and I just couldn't get him to call back. And every time I called, he was in a meeting. It was like
the
God,
infamous in the meeting.
The emphasis in the meeting, right? And I'm thinking, God, does Simon ever get to go for a walk in the park? Does he even get to go out and eat? And so one day I was so frustrated. I was talking to his assistant. She says, he's in a meeting. It was about 11:30. I said, well, has he eaten yet? And she said, no. Why do you ask? And I said, well, does he like pizza? She says, everybody likes pizza. I said, well, what's the best pizza place in town? She says, Polly's down the street. I said, okay. And this is in the days of fax machines, right?
Yeah.
I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to order 3 extra large pizzas. I'm going to have them sent, and then I'm going to fax you a poem. And I want you to put it on top of the pizza box. And it started with something like, is it snowing or is it raining? Nothing more influential than online training. And it was this whole poem that I wrote him. And it was pretty funny. 90 minutes later, I get a call from Simon. He is laughing so hard.
Yeah.
And it resulted in a 7-figure deal, which was a pretty large deal for us at that time. And they've been a client ever since.
That's fantastic.
You got to be creative, right? You got to go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, talk about creativity. That there's the creative part, and then also that really showed. If I got a pizza delivered to my door, knowing you, I would be like, "That's Shari." That's something that like you really start to relate to that individual and their personality, and that's real and it's authentic. It's not it's not like the slimy salesperson trying to trick or a tactic to get into your office, right? It's really you and it's really authentic. That's a pretty good story.
Or the emails, Jill Conrad talks about this all the time. We have breakthrough technology that's going to, all the cliches, that we just delete.
I keep trying to unsubscribe to the same set of emails all the time. And I don't know how I get put onto a new mailing list, a new mail. It's the most funniest thing ever. But all right, I do want to talk about one last thing. And this is really a great closing question here for this discussion. And really, if you think about, Heart and Sell and the 10 universal truths every salesperson needs to know, the book is a model for really how to bend the new science of selling, the heart of communication. What makes selling with heart more effective?
Well, I think we've really touched on it a lot, Mario, and there's so many books out today about the science of selling, and there's not a science so certainly science is important, and we need to know that. The best way for me to describe it, David Brooks, the columnist in the New York Times, came out with a wonderful book called Character. And in his book, he talks about 2 types of virtues. He talks about resume virtues, and then he talks about eulogy virtues. And resume virtues are those virtues of sales techniques that you might think of. Virtues like drive, like competition, all the sales skills. It might be storytelling, it might be isolating, all of these sales skills that we need to have, what you might put on your resume, computer skills. He says, but then there's eulogy virtues, what someone would say about you in your eulogy. And those are virtues like integrity, like empathy, like resilience, like emotional intelligence, problem solving, kindness, optimism. A lot of people don't realize you're not just born optimistic. We have to work on optimism. And in the last chapter, I talk about 10 keys to maintaining an optimistic mindset. And it doesn't just happen. You have to practice them. And we also know from research that the more optimistic we are, the happier we are, the more successful we are. It's not the other way around. It's not, if only I had this, then I'd be happy. No, we know that if we're happy now, if we're content now, optimistic now, we're using a whole different part of our brain, and we can be more productive and more successful. So to answer your question, when we combine those resume virtues with eulogy virtues, that's when we have true success. And eulogy virtues, that's a life endeavor. That's not something that you learn like a great retort. And that's why selling with heart's more important. It's who you are. It's not what you do.
Woo, I just got chills. That was a fantastic thought and closing answer to the question. But I actually lied. I do have one more question.
Okay. But you had integrity about your lie, Mario.
Yeah, that's right. I will tell you
when I lied. Your lie, so it's okay.
Because that will make you trust me more now that I tell you that I lied. But actually, I like to close out all of the podcasts with one question, and it's really about trying to allow the listeners to establish a human connection with you. So here's my closing question for you. You are not prepared for this, I'm sure, but all-time favorite movie ever in the world, Shari, what would you say it is?
Oh, you're killing me. I'm on the board of the Sundance Institute of the Film Festival, so I watch a lot of movies, and I love independent film.
Do you? That's interesting.
Love independent film. I love the stories, the storytelling. But, this is funny. The one that gives me the chills, like when you just got the chills just now, more than any other film, it might be more obscure for some people, but it's Mr. Holland's Opus.
Okay, that's a new one. I haven't had someone say that.
You know what? I'll tell you what I love about Mr. Holland's Opus, and we use it in one of our seminars, and I sob every time I see this ending. And for those of you who haven't seen it, or those of you who may have forgotten it, Mr. Holland is an average person. He's a music teacher, but he always had, these visions of being, a great musician and being something much bigger than he was. But as it turned out, he was a music teacher all his life in a school. And he ended up getting fired because they downsized the music department. And towards the end of the film, he's cleaning out his desk and he feels like a failure because he never made it big. He never made it grand. I'm going to cry right now when I tell you.
I'm about to say you're going to make me start crying.
Oh my God. And then he's with his son and he's with his wife, and they say, before you leave, and again, this is like his last day, the end of his career, he thinks he's failed. They have set up a surprise for him, and he walks into the auditorium, and there's thousands of people there. And they're all the students from the past 20, 30 years now grown into huge careers that he's ever touched. And at that moment, he realizes it wasn't that I had to be this big person, that I had to have all this celebrity that I think we're all so obsessed with today.
Yeah.
I made a difference in the lives of so many individuals, and I changed their lives. And I think that too often we're obsessed with celebrity culture, and I've got to do something huge, but each one of us touches somebody every single day. And that's what life's all about.
Boy, I was unexpected, emotionally deep closing. That's great. I love it. That's fantastic. I don't even know if I have anything to say to that other than I feel warm. Well,
you're in San Francisco, so
yeah. Well, it is actually hot over here in this today for sure. Shari, I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge of Heart and Sell, 10 universal truths every salesperson needs to know. And for those of you that are listening, you got to get the book. Shari, if someone wants to connect with you, can they LinkedIn with you? Can they follow you on Twitter? What's the best way to connect with you?
To Twitter, LinkedIn, we've got a Facebook group, all the usual ways.
Okay. And if they want to go and buy the book, which I highly recommend, Amazon, best place?
Absolutely. Amazon. And for bulk orders, email me at sharilevitin.com because we have a whole leader's guide. So a lot of teams are using the book for their entire training program for the year. So we've got content for managers and leaders so that they can work with the universal truths with larger teams.
Yeah. And Shari, we'll put that your actual email inside the show notes. But for those of you that didn't catch that, it's Shari at Shari Levitin, ShariLevitin.com.
You got it right.
Well, of course I got it right. You're my friend. Shari, love having you on the show. Thank you so much, my dear. You've been an absolute pleasure to Selling with Social.
Thank you, Mario. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Selling with Social podcast. I'm super pumped that you are our guest today. Here's what I want you to do right now. Go to jr.com/podcast and support our podcast, please, by distributing it out anywhere you can get it to on social. And don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes. You'll find all the instructions there on the site on how to subscribe to the Selling with Social podcast. Until the next show, keep on rocking. Mario Martinez Jr. out.